It was mid-October, the air crisp with the scent of damp leaves and wood smoke, when I found myself hunched over my desk in Eugene, Oregon. As a freelance graphic designer, my life revolved around pixel-perfect layouts, late-night coffee rods, and the soft glow of my dual monitors. That evening, the Pacific Northwest had settled into one of its quintessential moods. Rain tapping gently against the windows, a kettle hissing on the stove, and my golden retriever, Bowie, sprawled across the rug by the front door. The house was a cocoon of comfort, scented with lavender from a flickering candle and underscored by the faint hum of an indie playlist drifting from my speakers. Outside, our quiet neighborhood was cloaked in darkness, the sparse streetlights casting only faint pools of light. I loved the lack of illumination. It made the rare, clear nights perfect for stargazing. But that night, at around 12:45 a.m., the tranquility shattered. Bowie's head snapped up, his ears twitching as he let out a low, uncertain growl. It wasn't his usual playful grumble when a squirrel dared to scamper across the lawn. This was different. Tense, almost wary, directed at the front window. I paused mid-keystroke in Photoshop, my fingers hovering over the keyboard as I muted the music. The room fell silent, save for the rhythmic patter of rain and the faint whir of my laptop's fan. Then Bowie barked, a sharp, authoritative sound that sent a jolt through me. I slid off my chair, my fuzzy socks whispering against the hardwood, and approached the window. My hand hesitated before parting the curtain, a prickle of unease crawling up my spine. There he was. A man stood on the sidewalk, maybe 20 feet from my front door, motionless under the drizzle. His dark raincoat glistened faintly, the hood pulled low over his face, hands buried deep in his pockets. He wasn't checking his phone or glancing around like a lost pedestrian. His gaze was fixed on my house, unyielding, as if he could see through the walls. The rain beaded on his coat, but he made no move to shield himself, no gesture to suggest he was merely passing through. I stood, frozen, the curtain clutched in my hand, waiting for him to do something, walk away, knock, anything. But he remained a statue, his stillness more unsettling than any sudden movement could have been. Bowie's barks grew sharper, his body shifting backward toward the kitchen as if reluctant to approach the window. I fumbled for my phone, snapping a blurry photo through the glass before switching to my security app. The cheap front door camera I'd installed last year wasn't ideal, but it was better than nothing. I hit record, my pulse quickening as I debated what to do next. Confronting him felt reckless. Something about his posture screamed wrongness. I slid the deadbolt into place with a soft click, drew the curtain shut, and retreated to the back of the house, my socks catching on the rug's edge point. 10 minutes later, I crept back to the window, my breath shallow. The sidewalk was empty. Relief washed over me, tinged with embarrassment. Maybe he was just a neighbor caught in the rain, or a drunk wandering home from a bar. I coaxed Bowie back to his bed, his tail still stiff, his eyes darting to the door. I told myself it was over, that I was overreacting. But at 1:20 a.m., the atmosphere shifted again. The TV, left on mute after my playlist ended, had gone black, its screen a dark mirror reflecting the living room. In that glossy surface, I caught a flicker of movement, a silhouette gliding past the window. Not a vague shadow, but the distinct outline of a man, his raincoat swaying as he moved with deliberate slowness. My heart lurched. I dropped to the floor, crawling behind the couch, my knees scraping the hardwood. I inched toward the corner window overlooking the side yard, where overgrown hedges cast jagged shadows. Parting the curtain just a sliver, I saw him again. He was closer now, pacing the length of the house, pausing at each window as if testing the view. His hood obscured his face, but I could make out the faint glint of rain on his coat, the measured way he placed each step. He carried nothing, no flashlight, no phone, no tools, just his hands in his pockets, his movements eerily patient. Was he looking for a way in, or simply trying to unnerve me? I couldn't tell. The rain muffled any sound of his footsteps, leaving only the occasional rustle of wet leaves as he brushed past the hedges that killed every light in the house, plunging it into darkness. In the kitchen, I grabbed the largest knife from the block, its weight cold and unfamiliar in my hand. Bowie pressed against my leg, his warmth a small anchor in the growing dread. We sat in silence, the knife trembling slightly in my grip as I strained to hear anything, a creak, a tap, a whisper of movement. Time blurred, each second stretching into eternity. I checked the security app again, but the camera showed nothing. He was too far from the door to trigger it. Then Bowie growled. Again, his head swiveling toward the back of the house. My stomach dropped. I tiptoed to the kitchen window, my bare feet sticking to the linoleum, and peered through the blinds. Beyond the wooden fence, under the gnarled branches of an old oak, he stood again, motionless, facing the house, his silhouette, barely discernible in the dim moonlight filtering through the clouds. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, and I could see the faint outline of his hood, the way his shoulders squared as if he were studying the back door. That was enough. I dialed 911, my voice a hoarse whisper as I explained the situation to the dispatcher. She was calm, almost clinical, assuring me an officer was nearby and would arrive soon. I stayed in the kitchen, crouched low, the knife still in my hand, Bowie's fur brushing against my arm. The minutes crawled by, each one heavy with the fear that he'd try the door, that I'd hear the knob rattle or the wood splinter. When the police arrived, their headlights sliced through the living room, casting long shadows across the walls. I met them at the door, my voice shaking as I pointed to the backyard. They searched the property, their flashlights sweeping across the wet grass, but found nothing. The man was gone, leaving no trace beyond the blurry footage on my camera, which showed only a hooded figure at the edge of the frame. One officer, a wiry man with a clipped tone, mentioned a similar call from a nearby street earlier that night. Same description, same eerie behavior. He didn't elaborate, but his casual tone unnerved me, as if this was just another night on the job. They suggested better locks and a higher quality camera system, then left, their cruiser's taillights fading into the rain. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat on the couch, the knife within reach, Bowie's head in my lap. The next day, I skipped work and drove to a hardware store, loading my car. With motion-activated floodlights, a new camera kit, and a smart lock system, I moved Bowie's bed to my room, his presence a quiet reassurance. I started carrying pepper spray, even for short trips to the mailbox, and kept the blinds closed whenever it rained. A few days later, my neighbor across the street, a retired nurse named Ellen, stopped by with a plate of cookies. Over coffee, she mentioned seeing a man in a dark raincoat in her backyard that same night. She hadn't called the police, assuming he was just a passerby, but when I showed her the footage, her face drained of color. "That's him," she whispered, her hands tightening around her mug. He was just standing there, looking at my patio. The nightmares started soon after, not of violence, but of waking to find him outside my window again, his hooded face pressed against the glass, his breath fogging the pain. What haunted me most wasn't the possibility of a break-in, but his silence, his patience. He hadn't knocked, hadn't tried to force his way in. He'd just watched, circling the house like a predator memorizing its prey habits. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was practiced, that this was a ritual he'd performed before, waiting for someone to make a mistake, to leave a door unlocked or a window ajar, that I still live in that house, though the cozy evenings feel different. Now, every time it rains and Bowie's ears perk up, I stop what I'm doing, my hand drifting to the pepper spray on my desk. Because a man who doesn't knock isn't there to talk. He's there to be let in, and if your locks hold, he'll wait. They always do. The Texas winter had arrived with a vengeance, coating Plano in a sheen of ice that glittered under the streetlights. I'm Laura, an 8th grade English teacher, and that night, I was buried in a stack of essays, red pen in hand, marking comma splices and circling awkward phrases. My one-story house, tucked near a wooded park, was quiet except for the occasional creak of settling wood. My dog, Dipper, a scruffy mutt with a knack for stealing socks, usually curled up at my feet, but that evening, he was restless, pacing between the couch and the back door. The power outage hit around 9:30 p.m., plunging the neighborhood into darkness. It wasn't unexpected. Ice storms often overwhelmed the grid, and I'd grown used to the routine. I lit candles, their flames casting a warm, flickering glow across the living room, and dug out my old camping lantern from the closet. My phone, at 83% battery, was my lifeline, though I resisted the urge to scroll through social media. The silence was oppressive, unbroken by the hum of the fridge or the click of the furnace. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows and snapping frozen branches with sharp, eerie cracks that I settled on the couch, a blanket draped over my shoulders, and tried to read by lantern light. But Dipper's absence nagged at me. I found him by the back door, his ears pricked, his body tense as he stared into the darkness. Assuming he needed to go out, I pulled on my boots and opened the door, the cold air biting my cheeks. The backyard shimmered with frost, the patio furniture encased in a thin layer of ice. Dipper didn't bolt outside as usual. Instead, he crept forward, his tail rigid, sniffing the air with a low, rumbling growl. That's when I saw it. A faint, rectangular glow just beyond the fence, where the yard gave way to a dense thicket of trees. It was unmistakably the light of a phone screen, cool and blue, hovering about chest height. My first thought was a neighbor, perhaps someone checking their messages on the nearby trail. But the glow didn't move, didn't bob or flicker. It was steady, aimed directly at my kitchen window, as if whoever held it was studying the house that I stepped back inside, locking the door with a trembling hand, and blew out the candles. The lantern went off next, leaving the house in near total darkness. Dipper's growl deepened, his paws clicking against the tile as he paced. I crouched by the window, parting the blinds just enough to peek out. The light had shifted, now closer to the fence, its beam still trained on the house. No footsteps, no rustle of leaves, just that silent, deliberate repositioning. .my phone buzzed in my hand, startling me. I texted my brother, Mark, my fingers clumsy on the screen. Someone's outside with a phone, watching the house. He called immediately, his voice low and urgent. I'm coming over. 10 minutes. Stay inside. I whispered back, my eyes locked on the glow, which drifted again, now angling toward the side of the house. Dipper's pacing grew frantic, his growls punctuated by sharp whines. The wait was agonizing. I crouched in the kitchen, my back against the cabinets, clutching my phone. The light moved once more, closer, then farther, as if its holder were circling the property, searching for the perfect vantage point. I imagined them recording, capturing every detail of my darkened home. The silence was worse than any sound, a heavy, suffocating absence that made every creak of the house feel like a betrayal. Mark's headlights finally swept across the front windows, and I ran outside, waving him down. He was already out of his truck, a flashlight in one hand, a crowbar in the other. We moved to the backyard, his beam cutting through the icy air. "You're trespassing," he shouted, his voice echoing off the trees. "Leave now, or we're calling the cops," silence answered. But the light was gone. The fence. We found proof. Shoe prints in the frosted grass, narrow and deep, leading from the woods to within 6 feet of the kitchen window. They stopped abruptly, with no trail leading away, as if the person had simply vanished. The prints were fresh, the edges sharp, suggesting they'd stood there for a while, watching. Mark's face tightened, his flashlight sweeping the trees. But nothing moved. We called the police, who arrived 20 minutes later. They inspected the tracks, took notes, and asked if anything was missing or damaged. I shook my head, explaining the light, how it had lingered on the house. One officer, a woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, nodded. "We've had similar reports during blackouts," she said. "People casing homes, sometimes recording. Hard to catch without clear evidence." They left, advising motion lights and cameras. Mark stayed the night, sleeping on the couch with Dipper curled beside him. We didn't talk much, but every snap of ice outside made us tense. When the power returned, the sudden blaze of lights felt jarring, exposing the vulnerability of the night before. The following weekend, I installed floodlights and cameras, rearranged furniture to block sight lines, and started checking the locks obsessively at school. One of my students, Jasmine, noticed my exhaustion. "You okay, Miss Carter?" she asked, her eyes sharp with concern. I brushed it off with a smile, blaming the storm, but I didn't tell her about the light, how it had drifted like a predator's gaze, or how Dipper now barked at shadows. Whoever was out there hadn't tried to break in. They'd watched, and that was worse, because it meant they could come back, armed with knowledge of my home, my habits, my defenses. I'm Daniel, an IT specialist in Bozeman, Montana, where the winters are long and the nights quiet. In late August 2021, my wife and kids were visiting her parents in Spokane, leaving me with a weekend of rare solitude. After a grueling week of client calls and server upgrades, I savored the peace. I made pulled pork sandwiches for dinner, poured a glass of bourbon, and settled into bed with a paperback and soft jazz playing from my phone. The house, a 2-story with sturdy insulation, was still. Its only sounds the hum of the ceiling fan and the occasional creak of old floorboards. Around 11:30 p.m., a series of soft thuds broke the calm, deliberate, heavy, like footsteps on the roof above my bedroom. At first, I chalked it up to raccoons, a common nuisance near the attic vent. But these steps were too measured, too spaced out, each one landing with a weight no animal could muster. I paused, my book forgotten, and listened. 3 steps, then silence, followed by 2 more, pacing across the roof in a slow, careful rhythm that I cracked the bedroom window, the cool night air brushing my face, but heard nothing outside. The sky was bright with stars, the yard below empty. The steps resumed, fainter now, as if their maker had sensed my attention and adjusted. I grabbed a heavy-duty flashlight from the kitchen and stepped into the backyard, the grass damp from earlier rain. Sweeping the beam upward, I froze. A ladder, not mine, leaned against the guest room window. My own ladder was locked in the shed, but this one, a tall silver extension model, gleamed with condensation. Its rungs bore fresh boot prints, the mud still wet, glistening in the light. On the roof's edge, I spotted a faint scuff mark where someone had slipped, the shingle smeared with dirt. My stomach twisted as I scanned the roof line, expecting to see a figure crouched there, but it was empty. I pulled the ladder down, its metal scraping loudly against the siding. If someone was still up there, they'd be trapped. I texted my neighbor Tom, a former Army sergeant, and waited on the porch, my flashlight trained on the house. Tom arrived quickly, his flannel shirt half-buttoned, a flashlight in hand. Without a word, he nodded, and we circled the property, calling out warnings into the dark. Nothing answered. Tom climbed the ladder to the roof, his beam sweeping across the shingles. Boot prints, he called down, his voice clipped. Still damp, no tools or bags. Whoever it was, they weren't subtle. We found no one, no sign of entry or damage, but the prints told a story. Someone had been up there, moving with intent, likely peering into the windows. Back inside, I left the lights on, refreshing the camera feed obsessively. The next morning, I checked the shed, a neglected corner of the structure filled with rusty tools. Its basic lock was intact but unlatched, hanging slightly open. Inside, on the workbench, sat a pair of heavy-duty rubber gloves, black and warm to the touch, smelling of sweat. They weren't mine, and their presence felt like a taunt, a message left by someone who'd been far too close than I'd realized. That I upgraded my security that week. Cameras, motion lights, window alarms, even a reinforced attic hatch. My wife thought I was overreacting, but I didn't tell her about the gloves or the ladder's boot prints. Whoever it was hadn't tried to break in, hadn't stolen anything. They'd tested the house, mapping its vulnerabilities. I knew they'd be back, and I'd be waiting. I'm a 27-year-old video editor in Fresno, California, thriving on late nights and the freedom of remote work. My rental, a modest one-story with a small yard and a creaky shed, was my sanctuary, where I cut footage, gamed, and ordered takeout at 2 a.m. The neighborhood was decent, not perfect, but I'd never had trouble until June 2023, when the summer heat clung to the house like a second skin. That night, I was deep into an online match, my headset on, the room lit only by the TV's glow. A bag of chips sat open beside me, the air heavy with the scent of popcorn I'd microwaved earlier. Around 2:30 a.m., a faint rattle cut through the game's audio, a metallic jiggle from the front door, like someone testing the knob. I muted the sound, my hands frozen on the controller, the room dense with sudden silence. I waited, hoping it was just the heat warping the metal, but then it came again from the back door, a slow, deliberate twist that I killed the lights and TV, the darkness closing in as I moved to the kitchen. The rattling continued, methodical, moving, from the garage door to the laundry room, then the side gate. Each knob was tested, the same soft scrape echoing through the house. It wasn't random, it was a checklist, a systematic probe for weakness. My metal bat, a gag gift from a late-night Walmart run, felt heavy in my hand as I crouched behind the kitchen island, phone in the other, whispering to the 911 dispatcher. The sound stopped, leaving a silence. That silence felt worse than any noise. I crawled to the office, closing the blinds I'd left ajar, and glimpsed a shadow by the neighbor's fence. The police arrived 15 minutes later, finding no one, but oily smudges marked every knob: front, back, garage, shed, gate. A test, one officer said, his flashlight glinting on the back door's print. They check who locks up. The next morning, I scoured the property and found a sagging camping chair and a discarded hoodie by near the shed, hidden in the grass. The hoodie, damp and musty, smelled of sweat and earth, its blankness unnerving. Someone had watched, waited, maybe for hours. I installed cameras, motion lights, and deadbolts, my dad helping me secure the windows. A neighbor mentioned a van parked nearby that night, its engine off, unnoticed at the time, that I'm cautious now, double-checking locks, keeping my phone charged. The methodical nature of that night lingers. Someone tested my home, and I know they'll try again. Every knob click, even in daylight, makes me pause. The sound a warning of what it means to be watched. These stories aren't just about fear. They're about the quiet invasion of safety, the way a stranger can rewrite the boundaries of your world. Stay vigilant, stay locked, and share your own shadows in the comments. Stay safe.